23 disturbing theories, 7 levels. A single theory can change the vibe of an entire show, and we have dozens of them. We'll start with 3 tunes you will definitely be familiar with, but the further into the iceberg, the darker things will get. Let's start at the tip of the iceberg. Level 1. Moana, Chosen by Death. Moana has become one of Disney's biggest and most beloved franchises, but there's a theory that Moana might have actually been dead for most of her movie. Let's try and unpack that one. Toward the beginning of the movie, Moana sets sail from her island home, determined to find the demigod Maui and restore Te Fiti's heart. But the ocean that she trusts so completely turns violent without warning, sending giant waves crashing over her tiny boat. The screen fades to black during that typhoon, and when it returns, Moana washes up on a mysterious island where she meets Maui for the first time. Now, what if this wasn't a cinematic transition? What if it was actually a way of subtly suggesting that Moana died during that brutal wave encounter? After the initial typhoon, Moana never encounters another living human being. She speaks with Maui, a demigod trapped for centuries. She battles the Kakamora, coconut creatures that exist purely in myth. And she survives Tamatoa's underwater lair and plunges hundreds of feet through mystical barriers without a single injury. There's no way an ordinary person could possibly withstand that, but she does. There's also a few extra tidbits to back this up. The original script called the Realm of Monsters the Underworld before Disney changed it, not to mention the fact that her grandmother appears as a spirit guide, something that should be impossible if Moana were still alive. And of course, the ocean itself behaves differently around her, responding to her commands in ways it never did for anyone else. When Moana finally reaches Te Fiti and returns the stolen heart, it's a way of completing her spiritual mission. The goddess heals the islands and restores Maui's fishhook, but she also repairs Moana's completely destroyed boat and possibly brings her back to life. Only then does Moana return to her village and interact with living people again, which would mean that Moana's entire heroic journey took place in a realm between life and death, where she had to prove herself worthy of resurrection. She basically went through hell. Magic School Bus, Unsafe Science Trips. The Magic School Bus is a very strange kid show that largely defies explanation, but some still try their best. Case in point, what if Ms. Frizzle's classroom operates as a covert testing facility disguised as educational field trips? If we go back to the pilot episode, we see Arnold removing his helmet on Pluto and instantly freezing, an event that traumatized countless viewers who watched him nearly perish in the vacuum of space. It also traumatized me because that's not how heat dissipation works in space. Look it up. Fortunately, Arnold survives with nothing more than a cold, not how a cold works either, but his behavior dramatically shifts afterwards. He transforms from an enthusiastic student who defends Ms. Frizzle and requests space travel into someone perpetually anxious about field trips, constantly repeating, "I knew I should have stayed home today."
I knew I should have stayed home today.
It's PTSD. In a later episode, Ms. Frizzle shrinks the entire class and forces them inside Arnold's digestive system without his consent. But why? Was it punishment? Do students who resist face invasive consequences? At one point in the digestive system episode, Arnold actually appears on the bus, despite being the one they're traveling through. Obviously, that could be an animation error, but what if Ms. Frizzle is creating identical replacements whenever students perish during these lethal expeditions? After all, the classroom contains numerous anatomic models that move and blink as if alive, suggesting they're harvested from previous victims rather than educational props. And it's not like the parents know anything about these trips. Ms. Frizzle takes children to active volcanoes, prehistoric eras filled with predators, and the vacuum of space without proper safety equipment. And what kind of parent would willingly allow their children to go on trips where the whole class will just drive a bus into them? That's a weird sentence. Phineas and Ferb, Time-Traveling Dad. Fan theories about Phineas and Ferb often explore dark territories, but this one is a little sadder than usual. This theory suggests that Dr. Doofenshmirtz is actually an adult Phineas who traveled back in time to orchestrate his own childhood.
20 years in the future.
The theory probably began with the basic observation that both characters share triangular head shapes and exceptional inventive abilities. So it makes sense that adult Phineas would have discovered his childhood adventures left behind massive destruction and timeline disruptions. Rather than simply preventing these events, he chose a more complex solution, becoming the villain who would secretly manage every outcome. To be fair, Doofenshmirtz's consistent failures suddenly make a lot of sense under this framework. Instead of his inventions malfunctioning, they're doing what they were designed to do: fail at precisely the right moment to erase evidence of young Phineas's projects before his mother arrives home. Every evil scheme is actually just a carefully orchestrated cleanup operation, with adult Phineas essentially playing janitor to his younger self's chaos. It does, however, raise a little problem: Perry. Maybe adult Phineas realized he never spent enough time with his pet, so he creates the Doofenshmirtz persona specifically to force interactions with Perry. The cheesy accent and theatrical villainy are just a very creative disguise to prevent Perry from recognizing his true identity and disrupting the timeline. But now this theory basically turns every episode into a puppet show where adult Phineas manipulates literally everyone around him, including his younger self, who remains oblivious to this shadow control, living out what feels like spontaneous adventures that are actually predetermined by his future self. The real mark of a genius is being able to control yourself. It does, however, strip away all the fun spontaneity from Phineas's life because we know that it's all built from a place of loss or regret. Adult Phineas desperately wants to ensure his childhood was good no matter what. And if he had a nickel for every time he lived through that period of time, well, he'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice.
If I had a nickel for every time I was doomed by a puppet, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice, right?
Level 2. Monsters Incorporated. Brave. Boo's Dark Destiny. Do Monsters Incorporated and Brave have more in common than being Disney animated movies? According to some people, they have a character in common: Boo. The theory goes that Boo doesn't simply grow up and move on from her encounter with Sully in Monsters, Inc. Instead, she allows it to consume her entirely, changing her into, well, someone very, very different. The theory suggests that after her experience in Monstropolis, Boo becomes obsessed with finding Sully again. She discovers that the doors used by monsters are actually something much more powerful than portals between worlds. I'm talking, of course, about time machines. That revelation is life-changing. Rather than accepting that her monster friend is gone, she dedicates her life to mastering the door technology that brought them together. Maybe, if she can get it just right, she can find him again. So, how does this link to Brave? Take a closer look at the items inside the witch's cottage. Hidden among her wooden carvings are objects that shouldn't exist in medieval Scotland, including a carving of Scully, complete with his distinctive features and even a wooden Pizza Planet truck. Sure, these are little Easter eggs from Pixar, but maybe there's a deeper meaning. Maybe these are memories carved from a future that hasn't happened yet. The witch's obsession with wood stems from her understanding that doors are the key to time travel. Her cottage functions as a workshop where she experiments with magic doors, similar to the technology she learned about in Monstropolis. The witch constantly disappears through doorways, just like the monsters did, because she's still searching through time. For many people, this theory explains the witch's inexplicable knowledge of future events and her fixation on turning people into bears. In this case, the bear transformations are desperate attempts to recreate Sully, who resembled a bear to young Boo. Of course, Boo never finds what she's looking for. She spends eternity jumping through time, growing old in medieval Scotland, crafting wooden reminders of a friendship that ended decades ago. Which is actually devastating. The innocent girl who called Sully Kitty became an isolated witch, forever searching for a monster who moved on without her. Wreck-It Ralph, Game Odometer. In Wreck-It Ralph, we're subtly told that the characters in the arcade live with a constant terror that shapes every aspect of their existence. When their game gets unplugged, they cease to exist entirely. But is that true? Look at Turbo's catastrophic actions years before the film's events. When he abandoned his own game to invade Road Blasters, both games were immediately unplugged and discarded. every character in those games vanished permanently, their codes scattered into nothingness. Turbo survived only because he had already escaped before the shutdown, but everyone else was erased without a trace. It was kind of the video game equivalent of a nuclear apocalypse. Nobody knew it was coming until they were already gone. Even Candy King's warning to Ralph reveals the mechanics of how this works. If Vanellope erases while her code remains corrupted and Sugar Rush gets unplugged due to player complaints about her glitching, she will be deleted instantly. Unlike other characters who can flee to Game Central Station, glitches cannot leave their games. They become trapped inside their failing code as the power dies. A painful, slow death. Hubert's homelessness after his game's removal demonstrates what happens to survivors. They become digital refugees with nowhere to go. Nobody wants them, inside or outside. Even the movie's opening sequence shows decades of games arriving and leaving, but none of those departed characters appear among the homeless population. They simply vanish. There is a theory that unplugging doesn't kill, but merely resets characters to their original programming, erasing their memories and personalities, but preserving their basic functions, which is still pretty horrific. The conscious being dies while only an empty shell remains, kind of like a coma or amnesia. When the lights go out, it's game over. Avatar: Spirit World Gone Mad. The legend of Korra does not escape the fan theories. In fact, some fans believe that Korra destabilized the world with her own actions. She disrupted the spirit world. When Korra opened the spirit portals, spirits that had been calm for millennia became increasingly agitated and hostile. The dragon eel spirit that once peacefully resided near the southern portal turned into a violent entity that attacked humans and disfigured a gang leader. Other spirits followed suit, abandoning their traditional homes and invading Republic City streets without any regard for its human inhabitants. Well, this theory suggests that Vatu's influence never truly disappeared from the spirit world. When the Dark Spirit was imprisoned 10,000 years ago, his essence had already corrupted countless spirits, turning them dark and violent. Although Wan defeated Vatu, some believe that traces of his chaos-inducing power are still in the spiritual realm like some kind of infection. In fact, according to this interpretation, the spirit world itself began deteriorating once the portals reopened. The show does kind of hint at this, with the portal area becoming corrupted and lifeless, with spirit vines turning aggressive and attacking anyone who approaches. The whole place is decaying in a way that suggests it's been corrupted by evil. As always, human actions accelerated the disaster. Industrial pollution, territorial disputes, and the like enraged spirits who were already vulnerable to dark influences. The triple threat triad's attack on the portal area sparked a violent retaliation that left the Spirit's World Guardians consumed by rage. Each confrontation between humans and spirits pushed the spiritual realm further toward chaos until we reached that key point. The spirit world is now fundamentally broken. The protective barriers that once contained dangerous entities have crumbled, allowing malevolent spirits to freely cross into the physical world. The harmonious balance that Avatar 1 established has been replaced by an escalating cycle of violence and corruption. Or, to put it more simply than that, Korra messed up, big time. But who hasn't? Fortunately, a good way to fix that is to subscribe to our channel. That way, you'll never miss a new Iceberg. Now let's move on to the next level. Level 3. Courage the Cowardly Dog never left the middle of nowhere. Courage the Cowardly Dog is a show that lends itself very well to theories, but this one is asking a very bleak existential question. What if Courage, Muriel, and Eustace don't actually live in the middle of nowhere? What if the entire show is just Courage's way of seeing a very normal, ordinary world? He simply imagines himself living in the middle of nowhere because Courage has never known what lies beyond the fence. So now he sees shadows as big, terrifying monsters and everyday objects as items of evil. In his anxious perspective, this ordinary farmhouse feels like the sole surviving outpost in a really terrifying place. Look at his history. Courage was abandoned as a puppy. He came to the Begg family with nothing but the trauma of his past. Muriel and Eustace never venture far, not out of choice but physical limitations. They're clearly old, reinforcing Courage's belief that nothing exists beyond these fields. So now, any stranger approaching the gate becomes an intruder from an alien dimension or some kind of supernatural invader. His brain is literally creating things that do not exist, and the farmhouse is a kind of fortress against these imagined horrors. It gets even darker when you factor in that Muriel and Eustace are pretty unfazed by most visitors. Even though we and Courage see them as evil, disturbing entities that want to harm or scare, they don't even blink twice. Because maybe they're not monsters. Maybe they're just ordinary people. It's a common thing for neighbors or friends to drop by a home, but if you don't know who they are, of course you'll be terrified. Courage is hyper-vigilant, and he turns every minor incident into a cataclysmic terror. As someone who owns dogs, yeah, they do that sometimes. So in this interpretation, it's just a fun show about one dog trying to make his way through the day while coping with his severe PTSD from childhood trauma. Okay, it doesn't sound like a fun show when I put it like that. The Jetsons, Flintstones, Nuclear Aftermath Mosaic. The Jetsons and the Flintstones were made by the same people, but they clearly live in different worlds. Or do they? In 1987, the two shows crossed over in a special broadcast in which Elroy's time machine supposedly malfunctioned, sending the Jetsons to the prehistoric past where they met the Flintstones. But what if the machine didn't send them back in time? What if it just sent them back down to their world? A world where nuclear apocalypse had reset civilization to zero. The theory suggests that before the Jetsons' time, a massive global catastrophe forced humanity into two distinct classes: those wealthy enough to escape to sky cities, and those left behind to survive on the irradiated surface of Earth. The Jetsons live in pristine aerial apartments specifically because the ground below is uninhabitable wasteland. When the show occasionally depicts ground level, viewers see homeless people wandering concrete surfaces and walking birds. Yes, birds have literally abandoned flight because the sky is too crowded with the wealthy. The architecture tells the story. Everything is built on massive stilts to stay above the contaminated Earth and its peasants. Meanwhile, the surface dwellers, the Flintstones, frantically rebuild civilization using whatever materials survived the nuclear devastation. This explains why the Flintstones call themselves a modern Stone Age family and celebrate Christmas despite living in supposed prehistoric times. They're not prehistoric at all. They're post-apocalyptic survivors who retain cultural memories of the world that was destroyed. Their Stone Age technology represents desperate attempts to recreate modern conveniences using rocks and mutated animals instead of electricity and metals. The dinosaurs aren't actually dinosaurs. They're radiation-warped creatures that evolved in the nuclear aftermath. That's why Dino acts like a dog. He is one. It basically means that this cartoon world is just a very depressing reflection of our own class-obsessed capitalist society. But it makes sense. The Sky Dwellers maintain their comfortable lives while the ground survivors struggle with primitive tools and dangerous animals. When Flintstones characters occasionally launch objects skyward, they never come back down. We know gravity exists here, so where do they go? Intercepted by the aerial civilization to prevent contact between the classes, maybe. This creates a permanent class system where the accident of birth determines whether you live in a technological paradise or radioactive ruins, with both groups existing simultaneously but completely isolated from each other. Pokemon Trainer Bloop. The rules of Pokemon have a lot of unspoken implications when you really think about it. When wild Pokemon faint in battle, trainers walk away without a second thought, but the Japanese term for fainting is hinshi, which literally means near death. So are these creatures about to die and then just abandoned in the wild? Unlike captured Pokemon, which get rushed to Pokemon centers, wild Pokemon have no safety net. They're left helpless, unable to defend themselves against predators, unable to hunt for food, unable to survive the elements. In the game, fainted Pokemon cannot heal themselves. They need medical intervention or specific items to recover. But wild Pokemon don't have access to these resources. They either slowly recover on their own if they're lucky, or they die from their injuries, starvation, or predation while defenseless. Every gym challenge represents hundreds of wild Pokemon encounters. Trainers battle their way through routes, caves, and forests, leaving a trail of fainted creatures behind them. The weaker ones will never recover. The strong ones might survive to face the next trainer, only to be beaten down again. In many ways, this is a So Professor Oak's Pokedex project goes way beyond just cataloging Pokemon, because it's more like he's documenting species before they disappear. Each trainer thinks they're on an adventure, but they're actually participating in an ongoing campaign of ecological destruction, and their entire society is built on it. Pokemon centers exist to heal captured Pokemon, creating the illusion of a caring system. But they only save the ones that belong to humans and let the rest perish. It's a form of species selection that ensures only the strongest survive multiple encounters while the weak are eliminated. Which would imply that every Pokemon journey is actually a death march. The trainers move on, collect badges, and eventually become champions, but behind them lies a huge trail of deceased creatures. Which might be why some Pokemon species seem to be on the verge of extinction despite the apparent abundance of creatures in the wild. They've been eliminated by 10-year-old children who collect them to fight without even realizing what they're doing. Blue's Clues. Blue is the last kid. Blue's Clues is one of the most colorful cute kids shows of all time. But even this show has spawned numerous dark theories. This one, however, stands out as particularly unsettling. According to this theory, Steve might not be the friendly host playing with his dog that the show presents. He might be a man whose grip on reality has completely shattered. The theory suggests that Blue isn't actually a dog at all. She might be the last child left in Steve's world, or perhaps a ghost, or even a complete hallucination his mind has created to cope with his isolation. It doesn't really matter specifically. The point is that she does not exist. When you examine the show through this lens, everything becomes a lot more troubling. Steve is the only human character who appears consistently, trapped in what appears to be a house but might actually be a single room where he paces endlessly. Notice how, when he moves between rooms, his legs move up and down, but his position never actually changes on screen? Because he's not going anywhere at all. The talking objects throughout the house, salt, pepper, mailbox, the chairs, they're all responding to voices only Steve can hear. His mind has fractured to the point where he believes inanimate objects are having conversations with him. Blue becomes his primary anchor to what he thinks is reality, but she's just another manifestation of his deteriorating mental state. The clues she leaves aren't really clues at all, actually. It could be argued that they're his mind desperately trying to create structure and meaning in a world that is completely unmoored from logic. So, why would any of this happen? Well, that's open to interpretation. One of the more popular explanations is that Steve's mind invented Blue to fill a void left by the absence of actual children in his life. His enthusiastic interactions with the camera, addressing young viewers who aren't really there, become the desperate attempts of someone who has lost all connection to the real world. Each episode represents his mind constructing elaborate scenarios to avoid confronting the truth of his situation. It's just easier to communicate with talking salt and pepper shakers. Winnie the Pooh, Forgotten Friends in the Closet. Many years ago, a research paper published in the Canadian Medical Association journal titled Pathology in the 100-Acre Wood, a neurodevelopmental perspective on A.A. Milne, argued that Christopher Robin's beloved companions were a lot more than stuffed animals brought to life by a child's imagination. They were manifestations of severe psychological disorders. According to the researchers, each character in the 100-Acre Wood represents a specific mental health condition. Pooh himself embodies multiple disorders simultaneously: attention deficit hyperactive disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, and a binge eating disorder driven by his fixation on honey. Piglet displays all the hallmarks of generalized anxiety disorder, living in constant fear that small problems will become catastrophic. The paper suggests his condition went undiagnosed and untreated, leading to the emotional trauma he experienced during his various adventures. Eeyore suffers from chronic depression, though the researchers couldn't determine whether his condition stemmed from genetic factors or early trauma. But then they get to Christopher Robin himself. While the original paper suggested he showed no diagnosable conditions, later interpretations claim he suffers from schizophrenia. The animals aren't real at all, but auditory and visual hallucinations created by his fractured mind. Each character manifests depending on Christopher's emotional state, appearing and disappearing as his psychological condition fluctuates. As Christopher Robin grew older, he abandoned his toys, leaving them in the attic where they remained for decades. Was this a young man's attempt to suppress his psychological episodes by literally locking away the physical objects that triggered his hallucinations? The research inspired more investigations into the psychological subtext of the stories. One academic paper argued that the characters represent manifestations of parts of the narrator's unconscious and repressed memories and feelings. Everybody now believes that this once whimsical story is now one big metaphor for a child struggling with serious mental health problems. Triton's 7 Brides, Royal Blood Farms. Have you ever noticed how King Triton's daughters look nothing alike? While Disney presents this as charming diversity, a darker theory suggests that the 7 princesses aren't sisters in the traditional sense. Get ready for this one. The theory claims Triton strategically fathered children with mermaids from each of the 7 seas, which definitely explains their dramatically different appearances. Aquata's brown hair, Alana's black locks, Arista's blonde waves, and Adriana's golden tresses all point to different mothers from distant waters. Each one represents a territorial claim. Let me unpack that for a moment. Throughout history, royalty around the world have used marriages as political advantages. Specifically, there were instances where kings would use their children as diplomatic tools, with medieval monarchs regularly marrying off daughters to secure treaties and expand their influence, regardless of whether their daughters wanted that. So, in this theory, Triton simply took this strategy further, personally ensuring each major sea had his bloodline swimming its depths. The daughter's existence was a guarantee of his empire lasting. Ariel stands apart as the only true daughter of Queen Athena, marked by her distinctive red hair that mirrors her mother's appearance. So in theory, she would be the legitimate heir while her sisters remain the, products of diplomacy? They don't know that, of course. Triton would have kept these arrangements secret, allowing the daughters to believe they shared the same mother while using their births to consolidate power across the ocean. This changes the story quite a bit, turning a loving family into a, breeding operation. Triton is a strategic ruler, echoing mythological gods like Poseidon who fathered countless children across different realms. But where the theory really makes an impact is how it reframes every family interaction. Triton's protectiveness over Ariel takes on new meaning when she's the only daughter with a legitimate claim to succession. If he loses her, he's in serious, serious trouble. Level 4. Cars. Autoside. The Cars universe is fascinating and kind of strange, but there's something really dark going on once you take a closer look. Racing is very, very dangerous. It's basically a way to guarantee that cars suffer severe brain damage. Lightning McQueen crashes repeatedly throughout his career, each impact sending shockwaves through his organic brain tissue. You can see this clearly in Mater's Tall Tales, where Lightning cannot remember entire shared experiences. Well, if we look to the science, research shows that repeated vehicle impacts cause traumatic brain injuries. Lightning is literally exhibiting classic signs of brain damage from his racing career. Now, you might be sitting there and thinking, this is ridiculous, they're cars! Cars don't have brains! Well, you wasted a lot of time thinking there, my friend, because this is a cartoon. Pixar has confirmed that the cars in these movies have organs inside them, with brains located behind their doors. I hate that. So when Lightning crashes at 200 miles per hour, his brain slams against his skull, just like any organic being. But that has an even darker implication. If we're accepting that these cars have organs and brains like humans with their, shapes, then what the hell is happening at Mater's junkyard? Those are remains. He's collecting body parts from the dead, sleeping next to the potential organs of once living vehicles. The junkyard represents decades of autoside? There are ways to avoid this. The wealthy can escape this fate through engine transfers. We see this in deleted scenes where Lightning's consciousness was successfully moved to a steamroller body, proving that identity follows the engine. So now we have a two-tier system where the rich achieve immortality by swapping into new shells while the poor rust away in junkyards. Damn, even in cartoons we can't escape the class war. Hey Arnold, the Chemical Kids. Have you ever noticed how the students at PS 118 and Hey Arnold display physical abnormalities? I'm talking about Arnold's football-shaped head, Harold's unusual size and strength for a fourth grader, Stinky's heightened sensory abilities, and Sid's detached facial features. It's weird, right? Well, they might be chemically deformed. In the On the Lam episode, Harold, Stinky, and Sid conduct their rocket experiment directly behind an old police station, mixing chemicals that create explosive reactions. The episode reveals industrial infrastructure surrounding the school, with references to chemical storage and processing facilities that would surely have operated for decades before the students' births. That timing would suggest long-term exposure. And what happens when communities are near chemical plants? They regularly experience health effects from toxic emissions. Schools built near former industrial sites often discover soil contamination that affects entire generations of students. Exactly what this theory is suggesting. Look at Harold. His ability to overpower older students and adults suggests he's got some really advanced physical development, possibly because of those chemical exposures. Stinky's enhanced sensory abilities, particularly his acute sense of smell and hearing, align with documented effects of prolonged exposure to industrial compounds. And Sid's facial structure, with his nose appearing disconnected from his face, resembles the kind of developmental abnormalities that you see in people who have been linked to toxic exposure during critical growth periods. The school's location in an urban industrial area provides the perfect cover for decades of contamination. Abandoned factories, underground storage tanks, and chemical runoff would have saturated the soil long before PS 118's construction in 1932. So the students' parents, having grown up in the same contaminated environment, would pass genetic damage to their offspring, creating increasingly severe abnormalities with each generation. Basically, anybody who lives in this town is screwed. Up. Carl's dead. Russ is the angel. The central premise of Up is that an old man wants to complete a promise he made to his late wife. But what if he didn't really make it there? What if, when Carl receives the court order to vacate his house, he doesn't survive the night? Instead of waking up to face his eviction, Carl passes away in his sleep, and everything viewers witness afterward represents his journey through the afterlife. Well, the impossibility of his balloon-powered escape becomes the first clue that something fundamental has shifted in the reality of the story. Russell appears at Carl's door the next morning claiming to be a wilderness explorer who needs one final badge to complete his training. His assisting the elderly badge requires him to help a senior citizen cross something: the street, the yard, or the porch. But according to the theory, Russell is actually a guardian angel in training, and his final badge represents earning his wings. The crossing he must help Carl complete is the transition from life to death, from the physical world to the spiritual realm. The theory explains why Russell appears as a young boy rather than in traditional angelic form. Carl and Ellie were never able to have children, a devastating loss that shaped their entire marriage. God, this movie's sad. Russell's youthful appearance fulfills their unfulfilled desire for a son, making Carl's acceptance of his fate emotionally easier. The balloon house is the vehicle, of course. The impossibility of it suggests that the laws of physics no longer apply because Carl has already departed the physical world. Paradise Falls is Carl's interpretation of heaven, the paradise he and Ellie had always dreamed of reaching together. The house represents Carl's attachment to the physical world, his refusal to let go of his earthly existence and memories with Ellie. Throughout their journey, Carl desperately protects the house, dragging it behind him even when it becomes a burden. His eventual decision to abandon the house at Paradise Falls symbolizes his final acceptance of death and his willingness to release his grip on mortality. Only after letting go of his physical attachments can Carl complete his spiritual journey. He has earned his place in the afterlife and can now move freely between realms, finally at peace with his fate and ready to reunite with Ellie in whatever lies beyond Paradise Falls. Yeah, that's all we needed. Make this movie more emotional. Snow White, Death's Bride. The story of Snow White seems one of Disney's most straightforward, but the film's most disturbing interpretation suggests that Snow White never actually survives her encounter with the poisoned apple, and that the prince isn't her savior at all. He's death itself come to collect her soul. At the beginning of the movie, Snow White sings about her dreams of true love when the prince appears seemingly from nowhere, startling her so severely that she flees into the castle. Sure, she's shy, but this is a pretty strong reaction to a little surprise, no? More like a reaction of fear. Not to mention that the prince appears precisely when Snow White leans dangerously close to the well, a moment that could have been her first brush with death. But Snow White also sends a dove to the prince, which seems romantic, until you realize that doves represent the soul's release from its earthly bound duty. In folklore, doves are mourning birds whose calls are sorrowful and low, hardly the messenger of love, but the perfect symbol of a soul being marked for departure. Later in the movie, when Snow White is supposedly dead, the prince's arrival on a white horse completes the picture. In biblical tradition, death rides a pale horse, and the prince's pristine white horse fits this description perfectly. And the kiss of death is a literal folkloric concept where death takes the final breath from the dying. When someone dies, air expels from their lungs, and ancient folklore described this as death kissing the person to extract their life force. Snow White's farewell to the dwarves also gets a completely different meaning now. She isn't saying goodbye because she's going to live in a castle, she's saying goodbye because she's going somewhere the living cannot follow. The dwarves, as magical creatures, can see her spirit departing, which explains why they can witness this final moment. But then we come to the film's final shots. Snow White and the prince head toward a golden structure floating in the clouds, clearly meant to represent heaven or some form of afterlife. So is this really a happy ending, or are we watching her go off to the next life? Level 5. Adventure Time, Land of Broken Imaginations. What if Adventure Time's vibrant Candy Kingdom and talking dogs are not the cute, quirky cartoon fun they seem to be? What if the Land of Oo exists as Earth's remains after the Great Mushroom War, a nuclear conflict that decimated humanity roughly 1,000 years ago? By the way, in this theory, the Mushroom War doesn't refer to the edible fungi kind, but mushroom clouds from the atomic bombs that carved chunks from the planet itself. In this world, nuclear fallout totally altered reality rather than just wiping people out. The radiation transformed survivors into weird-looking mutations while giving sentience to inanimate objects, creating the candy people and other bizarre inhabitants that populate Finn's world. So Princess Bubblegum represents some kind of lab-grown organic matter achieving consciousness, while the Ice King embodies a human driven insane by a cursed crown that keeps his irradiated body alive. You get the picture. It suggests that this bright, colorful world is being filtered through damaged minds coping with unimaginable trauma. Some versions have even suggested that Finn exists in a reduced coma after losing his dog Jake, with his brain constructing elaborate fantasies to escape reality. Other interpretations frame Jake as the user, experiencing acid trips where his guilt over a deceased sibling manifests as protecting the human boy Finn. There's a lot of dark ones like that. But look how the underground subway system filled with skeletons and buried nuclear weapons constantly reminds viewers of the true horror beneath Oo's surface. We see abandoned cities lying submerged underwater while military refuse litters the opening credits. The few human survivors either fled to isolated islands or went underground to escape the radioactive wasteland above. It turns the entire show into something much, much darker. It's now about a boy attempting to process abandonment trauma while trying and sometimes failing to connect with people. Humanity is dead, but the bubblegum is alive. Lovecraftian Pibby, Infinite Absorption. Learning with Pibby is an unusual cartoon, that's for sure, but there's a fan theory that reframes the glitch as a Lovecraftian entity, which is way darker than anything in the cartoon itself. The core premise is that the glitch is way more than a virus or corruption. To be specific, it's a cosmic entity that existed before the cartoon universes themselves. According to this interpretation, the glitch represents the primordial darkness that filled the metaphysical space of television before shows began broadcasting. This entity lived in the static darkness between channels, growing increasingly furious as more shows invaded its domain. Which means that the corruption it spreads is actually a deliberate campaign to reclaim its original territory by transforming light into darkness. With that in mind, it changes the entire focus of the show because now Pibby and the other survivors are confronting something that operates on principles entirely outside their understanding. The glitch isn't really evil, it's not corrupting characters just to cause harm, it's just simply what it is. A flame burns because it has to, not because it wants to destroy. This is kind of the same thing, and yes, I'm as surprised at you at how poetic that all sounded. This is basically the same fundamental horror that can be found in Lovecraftian fiction, where the most terrifying threats are those that exist beyond any moral or physical framework. Look at how the glitch spreads across different cartoon universes with no way of stopping it. Characters like Fred Flintstone are consumed precisely when they perform their most iconic actions, which implies that the glitch understands the narratives of these shows enough to hit them where it hurts. Whenever it touches the characters, they become part of the glitch itself, their personalities twisted into serving its agenda, which might explain why the glitch targets completed or canceled shows specifically. Rather than being a metaphor for network cancellation, the entity consumes all created things. But it shows some mercy by first focusing on the shows that have reached the end of their lives. It's cartoon euthanasia, I guess. Avatar: Benders as Mutants. In Avatar: The Last Airbender, are benders really born with gifts, or are they just mutants like in the X-Men? There's a theory that these abilities are actually genetic mutations born from radiation or spiritual disruption following a global catastrophe, which is a much darker take on the world. Someone on Reddit decided to do the math and dig into the rules and nature of bending in the bodies of these characters. Bending follows clear genetic principles, with children only inheriting the elemental type of their parents. That genetic component is so strong that identical twins can have different bending abilities, suggesting that the mutation is expressed unpredictably, even within the same genetic material, which is an exact mirror of real-world genetic mutations that can affect siblings differently despite identical DNA. There is a line from the show that raises some questions about this. The Lion Turtle's ancient statement that, "In the era before the Avatar, we bent not the elements, but the energy within ourselves."
In the era before the Avatar, we bent not the elements, but the energy within ourselves.
Is different now. Rather than describing a spiritual practice, this could reference the time before widespread genetic contamination began, when humans possessed only basic energy manipulation abilities. The sudden emergence of elemental bending across entire populations would then represent the first generation of mutation carriers, their genetic material fundamentally altered by whatever catastrophic event preceded recorded history. You can also see the effect of it in the environment. The hybrid animals and the existence of creatures like the platypus bears suggest that the same catastrophic event that created bending mutations affected all life on the planet. The absence of normal animals, save for Bosco the bear, suggests that basically all living creatures were affected to some degree or another. Humans got incredible abilities. Animals developed some new species. Okay, so it's not quite the X-Men, but this ecological chaos clearly has something to do with it. Level 6. The Powerpuff Girls, the chemical origin of violence. The Powerpuff Girls, cute little superheroes, or government conspiracy gone wrong? Good question, me. The theory goes that Townsville is a fenced-off proving ground where the Pentagon fine-tuned living weapons. Stick with me here. In this theory, Professor Utonium isn't a quirky bachelor with a science hobby, but a government contractor supplied with a black-budget reagent nicknamed Chemical X, presumably shipped in unmarked canisters from an airstrip outside the city limits. Something like that. Anyway, the compound's real purpose isn't super strength at all. It actually destabilizes the neural pathways so thoroughly that all previous identity data are wiped, leaving a blank slate that can be used to recondition people. A biochemical shortcut to the perfect soldier some defense papers still fantasize about to this day. Sugar, spice, and everything nice are basically just cover ingredients pasted into the official narrative to hide the formula. It's a cover-up. Now here's where things get interesting. According to this theory, the girls themselves were Batch 3. Batch 1 allegedly escaped containment and now lurks under the alias Him, a being with a regenerating shell that kind of suggests something went very, very wrong. Batch 2 was Mojo Jojo. Obviously, their brain manipulation worked, but the loyalty conditioning failed, which explains the helmet to stop the headaches and the obsession with seizing the lab that made him. In fact, every monster charging across those skyscrapers is stamped with the same Chemical X signature side effects. Extended limbs, glowing eyes, erratic impulse control. Kinda makes you wonder why anybody would stay in this city. But there's an explanation for that also. Citizens stay because leases are government subsidized. That and the mayor is so useless that it keeps the outside world laughing instead of digging into what the hell is going on there. Townsville just keeps rebuilding after every disaster because the government can get more data from the damage. Sure, people die, but, well, if they were that important, they'd have a show about them, right? Gravity Falls, the town of endless manipulation. What is Gravity Falls? Is it just the most bizarre town in any cartoon, or is it a carefully constructed laboratory designed to test human responses to gradual identity erasure and reality manipulation? Yes, you heard me. The weird magnetism that Stanford Pines documented isn't a natural thing no matter how many times they try to push that one. This theory suggests that it's an artificial field designed to attract subjects who can handle cognitive chaos without suffering a total breakdown. Think about this. Every resident of Gravity Falls has experienced some form of memory alteration or identity crisis. So the Society of the Blind Eye must have been collecting data on how humans adapt when their memories are actually removed. Stan Pine spent decades operating under a false identity while his real brother existed in another dimension, for example. Not to mention that the town itself seems to have amnesiac properties that affect visitors, making them forget details about their experiences once they leave. The portal technology creates dimensional rifts that totally challenge residents' understanding of reality. When Ford was pulled into the multiverse, he encountered infinite versions of himself, each one slightly different, each one questioning which version was real. Bill Cipher represents the ultimate test, a being that can enter minds, possess bodies, and completely rewrite someone's sense of self. Actually, the townspeople show classic signs of subjects in a long-term psychological study. They accept these impossible situations with total ease, as though it's completely normal. Seuss treats the interdimensional monsters like regular everyday occurrences. Wendy remains unnaturally calm during reality warping events. Even tourists who visit the Mystery Shack seem primed to accept obvious lies as truth. But the show suggests that this experiment is multi-generational. The Northwest family has been involved for over a century, which would imply generations of subjects. Children are born in an environment where reality is constantly shifting, where their memories can be erased, where their fundamental understanding of existence is perpetually questioned. And they think it's completely normal instead of the truth. They're living in a controlled environment designed to break down human psychological defenses. Aladdin, Infinite Genie. The genie in Aladdin sits trapped in absolute darkness for 10,000 years, and when he finally emerges, he's basically having a psychological breakdown in real time. Don't believe it? Just look at him. The moment he comes out of that lamp, he can't stop moving, can't stop talking, can't stop shifting between voices and personalities like his mind can't function. He's literally bouncing off the walls because, well, that's what happens when you lock someone in a space the size of a closet with no human contact for longer than human civilization has existed. This theory actually has some basis in reality. Solitary confinement does shocking things to people in just a matter of months. When inmates are forced into social isolation, they begin to experience isolation panic, followed by depression, anxiety, and psychosis. They start hallucinating, losing their grip on reality, developing obsessive thoughts about the tiniest sensations because their minds have nothing else to focus on. Now multiply that by 10,000 years! Sorry, I'll stop. The genie's rapid-fire impressions and constant character shifts are his manic mind trying to cope with being out of solitary confinement. Between summonings, he's back in that lamp, alone with his thoughts in a space with no light, no sound, no sensation. Of course, he's fully conscious the entire time, experiencing every second of that imprisonment, which is even worse. The psychological research is clear about what prolonged isolation does to the human mind. It creates cognitive disturbances, emotional instability, and perceptual distortions. The genie exhibits all of these symptoms the moment he's released. He's trying to cram as much interaction and sensation as possible into whatever brief time he has before going back into the void. But this cycle repeats endlessly. Every time he goes back into the lamp, he's facing another stretch of complete sensory deprivation that could last centuries or millennia. He knows this, which explains why he becomes so emotionally attached to masters who show him even basic kindness. Aladdin represents the first genuine human connection he's had in 10,000 years, and the thought of losing that and returning to the void is terrifying enough to make him beg. The poor guy is a prisoner. He can't even wish for his own freedom. Level 7. The Fairly Odd Parents. Cosmo and Wanda are just meds. Do Cosmo and Wanda actually exist? It's a question that has existed for as long as the show, and it actually gets a lot more unsettling the deeper you dig. In this theory, Timmy Turner doesn't actually have fairy godparents. He has antidepressants. Specifically, Cosmo represents Zoloft, while Wanda embodies Prozac because they're distinct personalities matching the different effects these medications have on developing minds. The first time they appear is the exact night Vicky becomes his babysitter, precisely when his psychological distress peaks. Coincidence? I think not. In fact, the show's own rules support this interpretation. The fairies only appear when Timmy is alone, never when other adults are present. They transform into goldfish when authorities enter the room, and here's where it gets dark, because that's exactly what they are, just two fish in a bowl that a traumatized child projects elaborate personalities onto as his mind fractures under the weight of his own mistreatment. Whenever Timmy wishes for things, he's experiencing the altered perception that comes with psychiatric drugs and developing brains. The show even features an episode where he goes to Wish Rehab, a barely disguised reference to rehabilitation for pharmaceutical dependency. His wishes never have any lasting consequences because they're not real changes to his world, just temporary shifts in how the medication makes him perceive reality. His parents don't see the fairies because they're the ones administering the medication, viewing it as a solution to their problematic child rather than addressing their own failures. We can also slot Crocker in here. Rather than being a deranged teacher obsessed with fairies, he becomes a therapist or counselor trying to help Timmy face reality and break free from his pharmaceutical-induced fantasy world. His desperation to capture the fairies is actually a sign of his professional attempts to wean Timmy off the medications that are preventing him from processing his trauma and developing healthy coping mechanisms. So yes, the show is about a mistreated boy with a pill addiction. Really makes you think twice, doesn't it? And if you think that theory is wrong, well, here's where I would put another theory, if I had one.
This is where I'd put a trophy. If I had one!
If you're still in the mood for more cartoons, why not check out this iceberg about the most disturbing Family Guy moments?